Let me ask you something real, something raw. Have you ever stood in front of someone you loved and felt like they were behind a wall you couldn't climb, a silence you couldn't break? You pour your heart out, only to get indifference. You crave connection, but they retreat. And you start asking, what am I doing wrong? But what if I told you the problem isn't you loving too much? It's you leading with fear, not strength. And what if I told you avoidant love doesn't get deeper through chasing, pleasing, or shrinking yourself? It deepens when you become the anchored force in the room. Today, I'm going to show you how. When we approach an avoidant partner with fear, we unconsciously activate the very dynamic we're trying to avoid. Rejection, withdrawal, and emotional shutdown. Fear shows up in ways we don't always recognize. It might look like excessive texting when they go quiet. It might sound like repeatedly asking, "Are you mad at me?" Or, "Did I do something wrong?" Underneath those actions is an emotional message that says, "I don't feel safe unless you reassure me." But here's the deeper problem: avoidants are hypersensitive to emotional pressure. The moment they sense your inner world is dependent on their response, they feel trapped, and they retreat. Not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to deal with that intensity without losing them. Fear-based energy sends out a signal that says, "I need you to complete me." And nothing makes an avoidant shut down faster than that kind of energetic pull. You may think you're showing love, vulnerability, or care, but what they receive is a demand they feel unequipped to meet. This is where the cycle begins. The more you reach, the more they back away. The more you fear the loss, the more you try to cling, and the more distant they become. It's exhausting, it's painful, and it convinces you that you're unworthy of love, which is the deepest wound of all. Now let's be honest. This fear doesn't come from nowhere. It's rooted in your own attachment story. Maybe you had to chase affection growing up. Maybe love was inconsistent, and anxiety became your default response to disconnection. But if you bring that wound into a relationship with an avoidant, the result is emotional chaos for both of you. You'll constantly feel like you're not enough, and they'll constantly feel like they're too much. It's a painful match, but it can be transformed. Transformation begins when you take full ownership of your energy. You stop acting from fear. You stop trying to control the outcome. You stop basing your self-worth on how much attention you get from someone who struggles to give it freely. This is where strength begins to emerge. Not in force, not in manipulation, but in emotional responsibility. You ground yourself. You breathe through the panic. You tell yourself, even if they pull away, I will not abandon myself. This inner strength shifts everything. It creates space. It interrupts the avoidance expectation that connection equals pressure. And when pressure disappears, curiosity begins. That's the doorway to a different kind of intimacy, one built not on fear, but on power. Your power. Strength is so often misunderstood in relationships, especially when dealing with avoidant partners. We've been conditioned to believe that being strong means having the upper hand, being louder, more forceful, or more dominant. But real strength in relationships, particularly with someone who has avoidant tendencies, looks very different. It's not loud. It doesn't overpower. It doesn't need to win. True strength is calm. It's centered. It's unshakable in the face of emotional turbulence. And that kind of energy is precisely what creates the space for avoidant intimacy to deepen. When you interact with an avoidant from a place of grounded strength, you become a safe and consistent emotional presence. Not someone who needs answers right now, not someone who spirals every time there's distance, and not someone who uses emotional reactions to demand connection. Instead, you respond from a place of inner alignment. You observe without overreacting. You acknowledge what's happening without making it personal. That emotional centering is powerful because it disrupts the fear-based cycles that keep avoidant individuals stuck. Avoidants aren't emotionally absent because they don't care. They're emotionally absent because closeness often feels overwhelming, unpredictable, and unsafe. They've learned through life experience, trauma, or upbringing that being vulnerable puts them at risk. So when you bring reactive, chaotic, or emotionally volatile energy into the relationship, it reinforces that belief. But when you bring strength, quiet, anchored, regulated strength, you offer a new experiencing. Intimacy without threat. This doesn't mean you ignore your own emotions. It doesn't mean you suppress your needs or play games. In fact, it means the opposite. You become deeply aware of your feelings, but you don't let them control your behavior. You communicate your needs from a place of clarity, not desperation. You speak your truth without needing the other person to change immediately. You demonstrate, through your calm and consistency, that emotional depth isn't something to be afraid of. And here's the subtle shift. The more you embody this emotional strength, the more the avoidant begins to trust the space between you. They begin to lower their defenses, not because you demanded it, but because your presence doesn't feel like a threat. It feels safe. It feels steady. That's the environment where intimacy can finally take root. Because when they no longer fear being swallowed by your emotions, they can start showing you theirs. One of the most common traps people fall into when dealing with an avoidant partner is the habit of overgiving. It feels noble. It feels selfless. You tell yourself you're just being loving, caring, understanding. But beneath that behavior, there is often a hidden fear, a fear that if you don't constantly give, you'll be forgotten, left behind, or unloved. Over-giving is a survival strategy, not a strength. And when you over-give to an avoidant person, it doesn't draw them closer. It makes them feel overwhelmed, indebted, or suffocated. Ironically, the more you try to earn their love through giving, the more they withdraw. Avoidants are not looking for someone to manage their emotional experience for them. They're not comforted by excessive efforts to please or to fix. In fact, these efforts often confirm their belief that relationships mean pressure and responsibility they're not ready for. When they sense that you're giving out of your own insecurity, not from a place of confidence, it causes a subtle shift in the dynamic. They begin to see you as someone who is trying to control the connection through generosity. And that feels just as invasive to them as direct emotional demands. This is where it becomes crucial to differentiate between giving from love and giving from fear. Giving from love is open, balanced, and without strings. It says, I offer this because it's true to me, not because I need a particular reaction from you. Giving from fear, on the other hand, is transactional, even if it's not conscious. It's the emotional equivalent of saying, if I give enough, maybe you'll finally open up. That emotional bargain creates tension, obligation, and eventually resentment on both sides. Real strength means knowing when to stop pouring out your energy into a space that doesn't reciprocate. It means recognizing your worth isn't defined by how much you can tolerate or how much you can do for another person. It means allowing the relationship to breathe without constant effort on your part. You no longer feel the need to prove your value through sacrifice. When you step out of the role of overgiver, you step into your true power. You show up as an equal, not as someone desperate to be chosen. And in that shift, you become far more attractive, not just to your partner, but to yourself. You regain the dignity, the boundaries, and the emotional sovereignty that allow real intimacy to take root. Because love cannot flourish where one person is doing all the emotional labor. It grows in the space where both people show up freely, honestly, and equally. Avoidant individuals are not incapable of intimacy. They simply experience it differently. At their core, many avoidants carry a deep longing for connection just like anyone else, but their fear of vulnerability, engulfment, or being emotionally overwhelmed creates a protective instinct distance. They may seem cold, indifferent, or disinterested on the surface, but often that's just a defense mechanism. What they're really saying is, closeness feels unsafe. If you want that intimacy to deepen, you have to become a different kind of presence in their life. Not a pursuer, not a fixer, but a calm, grounded space where they don't feel threatened. You must create safety without smothering. This can be difficult, especially if your own attachment style leans anxious. Your instincts might tell you to try harder, to stay closer, to keep talking when they go silent. But that behavior often sends the opposite signal. It creates pressure to respond, pressure to match your emotional intensity, pressure to be something they don't feel ready to be. And when they feel that pressure, their defense system kicks in. They retreat not to punish you, but to protect themselves from a sense of emotional drowning. Creating safety isn't about being silent or passive. It's about being non-reactive and stable. It's about allowing space without taking it personally. It's about understanding that their distance isn't always a rejection, but a regulation strategy. When you stop reacting to their need for space with panic or protest, You change the dynamic. Your steadiness shows them something new, that connection doesn't have to cost them their independence or sense of control. This kind of safety can't be faked. It must come from inner alignment. You have to be secure enough within yourself that their emotional temperature doesn't dictate yours. That doesn't mean you don't care. It means you don't collapse every time they disconnect. When they feel that kind of emotional sturdiness, it begins to shift their perception. You become the one person in their life who doesn't ask them to be anything other than who they are in the moment. And that is incredibly powerful. In the space created by your calm presence, curiosity begins to emerge. The avoidant starts to question their own assumptions about closeness. They may not move toward you quickly, but they start to feel something they haven't felt before: freedom inside connection. And that sensation, for someone used to running from love, is what begins to change everything. Setting boundaries with an avoidant partner is one of the most powerful things you can do. Not to change them, not to punish them, but to honor yourself. The mistake many people make is trying to use boundaries as leverage, as a way to force the avoidant to respond, engage, or commit. This turns boundaries into ultimatums. You may say things like, "If you don't start opening up, I'm done," or "If you keep ignoring me, I'm walking away." While these statements might feel strong in the moment, they're often rooted in fear, not true empowerment. And avoidants sense this. They know when a boundary is a bluff and when it's a true standard of self-respect. Real boundaries don't need to come with emotional threats. They are calm, clear, and consistent. They're not about controlling the other person's behavior. They're about taking full responsibility for how you allow yourself to be treated. You're not trying to corner them into compliance. You're simply saying, "Here's what I need to feel emotionally safe. If that can't be honored, I will choose something different for myself." This kind of clarity disarms avoidant defenses because it removes emotional manipulation from the equation. It lets them know you're not trying to change them. You're just being clear about your own limits. Avoidants often grew up in environments where boundaries were either non-existent or enforced through punishment. So when you set boundaries without drama, never works. It introduces a new kind of relational experience, one that's stable and respectful, as you become someone they can trust, not because you tolerate everything, but because your behavior is consistent. You don't lash out. You don't chase. You simply maintain your ground. It's also important to understand that boundaries are not about withdrawing love. They're about protecting your emotional energy. You're not rejecting the person. You're choosing peace over chaos. You're choosing self-worth over self-abandonment. When you can say, "I care about you deeply, but I won't stay in a space that consistently hurts me," you give the avoidant a choice without forcing their hand. And more importantly, you reclaim your own power. This clarity creates space for honest interaction. The avoidant no longer feels pressured to perform or meet unrealistic emotional expectations. Instead, they're given the opportunity to step into the connection on their own terms. And whether they choose to or not, you've already won. Because you've chosen to honor yourself. That self-respect becomes the foundation of any healthy relationship, especially one with someone who fears closeness. Boundaries, when rooted in love and not fear, don't push people away. They invite them to meet you where you truly are. When you're in a connection with someone who has avoidant tendencies, it's easy to start playing roles without even realizing it. You wear a mask of who you think they need you to be. Less needy, more patient, more agreeable. You silence your true feelings to avoid conflict. You laugh off your pain to seem cool. You try to anticipate their emotional distance and adjust yourself accordingly, convincing away yourself that this kind of flexibility is love. But the truth is, it's not. It's fear. It's a protective act rooted in the belief that your authentic self isn't enough, that if you truly show your vulnerability, you'll be rejected or abandoned. And this only feeds the very dynamic you're trying to escape. Avoidant partners already wearing emotional masks of their own. They've built walls to protect themselves from intimacy because at some point in their life, closeness felt dangerous or disappointing. When you meet their mask with your own, you're not building a relationship, you're performing a play. No real connection can form when both people are hiding behind emotional disguises. The result is two people sitting in silence, both starving for real connection, but too afraid to reveal themselves. What creates a breakthrough is authenticity. Genuine, grounded, non-performative vulnerability. This doesn't mean spilling all your emotions in one breath or overwhelming them with your every fear. It means showing up as your real self without apology. It means being honest when something hurts, expressing your truth with calm confidence, and trusting that being who you truly are is more powerful than any mask you could wear. Being the mirror, not the mask, means reflecting back emotional honesty. When your partner withdraws, you don't chase or punish, you stay emotionally present and speak from truth. You might say, I notice you've been distant lately, and that's tough for me. I'm here when you're ready to talk, but I'm not going to force anything. That is strength. That is leadership. That is the kind of energy that softens avoidant defenses, because it doesn't pressure or perform. It simply exists with unwavering honesty. Avoidants begin to trust you when they see you trust yourself, when you show them what emotional safety looks like. Not through control, but through consistency. When you stop shape-shifting and start standing in your truth, you become the mirror that invites them to drop their own mask. That's where connection becomes real. Not in perfection, but in presence. One of the hardest things to accept when dealing with an avoidant partner is the waiting, the silence, the pauses, the emotional gaps. When you're craving closeness, those moments feel like abandonment. It's natural to want to close that gap, to fill the silence with reassurance, with conversation, with effort. But what most people don't realize is that chasing avoidance doesn't bring them closer. It drives them further away. Avoidance needs space to process, to regulate their emotions, and most importantly, to feel like they're coming toward you by their own choice, not because they're being pulled, cornered, or emotion never works, or emotionally managed. When you lead with fear, every pause feels like a threat. You panic, and that panic translates into behavior, over-explaining, checking in too much, asking for reassurance, or trying to spark connection when the other person is emotionally distant. While your intentions may come from love, the avoidant perceives this as pressure. It reactivates their core fear of losing autonomy. And so they retreat again, further validating your fear. This creates the very cycle you're desperate to escape. But when you lead with strength, everything changes. You don't collapse into the silence. You allow it. You trust that if the connection is real, it will survive space. You stop trying to fix every quiet moment and instead anchor yourself in your own emotional world. You tend to your peace. You focus on your energy. And in doing so, you send a powerful message. I'm whole whether you come close or not. Avoidants notice that energy. They might not say it outright, but they feel the difference. You're no longer chasing, performing, or waiting for them to validate your worth. You're simply being. That grounded presence creates an unfamiliar but intriguing experience for them. They're used to people demanding closeness, trying to breach their emotional walls. But you're doing the opposite. You're standing strong in your own space, not out of punishment, but out of self-respect. And in that stillness, something begins to stir in them. The absence of pressure gives birth to curiosity. The lack of pursuit creates room for reflection. Avoidants often realize what they miss once they feel safe enough to miss it. And they feel that safety when you're no longer trying to change them, fix them, or chase them. You're just there, whole, grounded, free. That's when they begin to turn around, not because they're forced to, but because something in them finally feels ready to come forward. This journey of understanding avoidant intimacy is not just about learning how to deal with someone else's emotional defenses. It's about transforming your own. It's about stepping away from old patterns of fear, anxiety, and self-abandonment and stepping into a version of yourself that leads with clarity, dignity, and inner strength. When we approach love from a place of insecurity, we inevitably fall into cycles of proving, pleasing, or performing. But when we begin to lead with strength, not aggression, not manipulation, but true emotional power, we change the atmosphere of the relationship entirely. We become the calm within the chaos, the grounded presence that no longer tries to chase or fix, but simply is. Avoidant partners are not broken, nor are they incapable of love. They just need a different kind of space, a different kind of safety. And that safety doesn't come from shrinking yourself to fit into their comfort zone. It comes from expanding into your full truth and letting that truth speak louder than your fear. When you stop chasing validation and start holding boundaries, when you stop overgiving and start honoring your emotional balance, you teach the avoidant something revolutionary: that love can be safe without being smothering. That connection can be real without being chaotic. Every step you take toward your own emotional center is a step away from fear and toward power. And in that space of power, you create the possibility for true intimacy. Not forced, not frantic, but authentic and earned. You become the mirror that reflects what healthy love looks like. And whether the avoidant partner chooses to step into that space or not, your role is not to pull them in. It's to hold your ground, not in bitterness, but in strength, not in ultimatums, but in unwavering truth. Because love that is built on fear will always collapse under pressure. But love built on strength has the capacity to endure, evolve, and expand. So as you move forward, remember this: you are not here to chase people into loving you. You are here to become so deeply anchored in who you are that love can't help but gravitate toward you. Let your steadiness speak louder than your anxiety. Let your silence be a sanctuary, not a scream. Let your presence a choice, not a performance. That is how avoidant intimacy deepens, not through force, but through the irresistible pull of your inner strength. Thank you so much for spending your time and energy with me today. If message resonated with you, if you saw pieces of your story, your patterns, or your pain reflected here, know that you are not alone. Healing from attachment wounds and leading with strength instead of fear is a powerful journey, and just by listening, you've already taken a bold step forward. Remember, you are worthy of deep, respectful, secure love, not someday, not if you change, but exactly as you are right now. You don't need to chase. You don't need to perform. You only need to return to your truth again and again. That truth is your strength. And that strength is what makes real connection possible. If you found this video valuable, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content on avoidant attachment, inner healing, and emotional empowerment. I'd love to hear your thoughts and stories in the comments. It's a safe space here. Until next time, stay grounded, stay powerful, and lead with strength, not fear. Take care and goodbye for now.